Okay, Mark, are you all set?
I am.
Okay. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to this afternoon's webinar. This is Charlie Taylor from KDLA, and I'm going to be facilitating the webinar today. I'll be here to help out with any technical issues that you might have. Go ahead and chat those in if anything happens to the sound or the slides. And I'll also be monitoring the chat just to kind of help out with any questions as they come in. Wanted to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. I've had several questions about that, so it will be available on our archived webinars page within about a week. So if there's anything that you missed or you want to review, you can come back and look at it, or definitely share it, anything like that. And for those of you who are attending live, you'll be getting a certificate of attendance that you can use for your certification. Of course, that will come in an email within a day or so from me. And you can see some downloads that are available now. Those will also be available at the end. So if you haven't had a chance to get the full-size PDF of the slides, you'll be able to do that at the end of today's webinar. And so it looks like most people are saying they're a little freaked out. So that's okay. You're going to get some good information in today's webinar from our presenter, who I'd like to introduce right now. His name is Mark Adler. He is the Executive Director of the Paris-Bourbon County Library. And Mark, I'm going to go ahead and mute my phone and turn it over to you.
Okay, I'm trusting that everybody can hear me. First, I'm going to mention, and I'm trying to get my buttons here on the slides. There we go. First, I want to mention, and this is straight from Terry, I am not an attorney. I'm not providing any legal advice here. And if you or your board need legal advice on taxing or any other decisions, please contact your library's attorney. I'm here to kind of tell you a story about my experience, and hopefully you can learn some good things from it, maybe learn some things that you don't want to do as well, but hopefully it can help you if you are deciding to at least consider taking the compensating +4 or anything above compensating rate. I will state first off that I don't profess to know everything or even much about raising the library's tax rate. I have done so recently, however, in 2016, and I am happy to share my experience in the hopes that it does help you if you are considering it. So, my first question, and since I'll speak up a bit. Okay, is that better, Jan? Okay, great. My first question or comment to everyone here is, and I imagine a good number of you are at least considering taking more than the compensating rate. Is that true? And since there are so few, if you just want to answer in the chat, that would be great. Some of you may just be interested in learning more about the process. Some of you may need continuing education hours. Whatever the case, I do thank you for participating. And I did realize when I was going over the slides this morning that reordering them could make a little bit more sense. So if you'll be patient with me and bear with me, I am going to do that. So we are going to go forward just for a second to tax rate basics. This is information that we receive every year when they send us our tax rates, but I think it is good to mention. Our tax rates come from KDLA. They use data that comes from the Kentucky Department of Revenue as provided by your local PVA. And what they do is provide you with 2 sample rates that you can use. Normally you get these rates in late July or early August. Sometimes it's delayed for some libraries. Usually that's because their PVA has been late in submitting their data. Information on how the rates are computed and whatnot, of course, are in the email we receive, but also in this presentation. Regardless of how your tax rate, of the tax rate your board selects, you do have to present written notification, as hopefully we all know, and testimony to your governing body, and this is generally your fiscal court. And of course your board, as you know, because you're here, your board does have the option of adopting a real or personal rate, which is different from either the compensating or the 4% rate. If you want those rates or more information on them, you can always ask KDLA and they will provide you with that. And then, of course, if your board adopts any rate which exceeds the compensating rate, and this is where today's talk comes in, you have to hold a hearing in the location where your governing body meets, and that's generally the fiscal court. You have to advertise it in advance according to statute, and for the purposes of this webinar, we're only considering rates between compensating and compensating plus 4%. If you want to take more than the plus 4%, there are other statutory provisions that come into play. I've never done it, and I don't even pretend to know much about that. So, does everybody pretty much understand the tax rate basics? Hopefully. So we can go back. Okay. I do want to say that raising your tax rate is a serious endeavor, and it's a decision that should not be taken lightly. Your responsibility to your taxpayers is that you will tax at a rate that is sufficient to provide for quality library services now and into the future. We all know that taxes are a hot-button issue with many, and any mention of increased taxes can generate discussion and, of course, anger. And, of course, it's the anger that makes us all terrified. I will digress just for 1 second because this is something that had come up when I was speaking with another library director recently. Part of my early budget preparation process is using the first recap data from the PVA. Hopefully you all know what that is. The other director I'd spoken with did not. First recap is your first recapitulation of taxes. And basically what happens is usually towards the end of March, your PVA should be putting together the first snapshot of what the tax roll looks like for the upcoming year. And between that time and when they certify it in July with the Kentucky Department of Revenue, it will change a little bit, but not a whole lot. What I do is I've worked really hard to develop a good relationship with all our elected officials, including the PVA, and I've asked that the PVA send us the first recap the minute it's available. So I always get it right at the end of March or at the beginning of April, and I can use that in the budgeting process, and that way our board has a really early look at what we might expect in terms of taxes, and it can help them determine whether or not we want to consider compensating rate or more than compensating rate. So hopefully that makes sense. As I mentioned, raising your tax rate is serious and it is stress-inducing. For me, the stress was pretty high. I had planned on not taking anything above compensating rate once we finished our construction process, and when I presented the initial budget to the board indicated to me that I was under some misconception and that for the first time in several years they were planning on taking the 4% above compensating rate. Again, that was not my initial plan. It was not part of the budget I had presented, but as it was the board's direction, it was a direction that I needed to support. So coming so soon off the heels of the tax lawsuit victory, this of course caused a great deal of anxiety for me. At that point, I recognized that we needed to do everything according to statute and that we needed to leave no part of the plan incomplete. We also wanted to make sure that we were completely open and transparent and followed all timelines that were applicable. So what I did was I started working on it very early, very quickly, and very intently. I checked my work, I rechecked my work, and then I reached out to the state library and many others for information, comments, and support. I can't say that doing that necessarily lowered my stress level any, but in doing that work, I did my best to safeguard the library and my job, and to do my job appropriately, which was important to me. After completing my initial work, I did go over the details multiple times, many times, and then I finally submitted the newspaper advertisement announcing the library's plan to take compensating plus 4%, and the reality at that point of everything struck home, and I was shaking. I was really, really scared. At that point, I knew we were really going to do this, and I was really going to participate in a stressful public hearing, never having had to do that before. And I started to panic, and I started to feel my anxiety level increase to the point that it was causing me to be sleepless. And then I had to remind myself to take deep breaths, long breaths, calm thoughts, and to repeat that, and that everything would be okay. And I encourage you to consider that as you go through this process as well. Remember, your board has your back. You've done your best to get good board members in place and get them trained appropriately, and they're doing their best to set your tax rates to provide the kind of revenue your library needs to continue operating the way your community needs it to. And they know that, so they do have your back. Your supporters aren't going to desert you. In fact, they're going to come out in droves if you ask. And your library is going to continue after all of the fallout of your hearing, whatever that fallout may be. So again, everything is going to be okay. So we then held our meeting, and to my surprise, I did survive, and I survived very well. The library survived. Everything was great. We forged better relationships with a greater number of people. And, at the time, I thought, who would have thought that could happen? But it all did. And what ended up happening was our tax rate hearing became a great thing rather than a horrible thing that put a bad taste in people's mouths. So, moving forward, there are some details that I think are really important. One of the first things that you want to do is make sure that when you hold your hearing, that you stack the deck in your favor. It's always the smartest thing to do. So you need to consider who you're going to invite. Deciding on that's a bit of an art, just like creating the best invitation list for special parties you might be having. But make sure you invite those who are going to speak the best for the library and all that the library offers. Also make sure that you're inviting a really diverse group of people. I made sure to invite other politicians. I invited the media. They were going to be there anyway, but receiving an invitation from me showed them that I really wasn't scared, even though I really was. I invited people who were poor. I invited people who were wealthy. I invited people from both political parties. I basically tried to invite somebody from every walk of life that I could, who I knew would speak well and in the library's favor. I did spend a great deal of time calling in favors and asking for support. This is a time when you want to call in some of those favors. I had actually heard through the grapevine from one of our local city commissioners that our mayor was on the warpath. He was furious that we were taking this increase in taxes because he prided himself on the fact that our city had, as he puts it, the lowest tax rate in central Kentucky, and they had plans that they wanted to enact, and us taking that rate would get in their way. And thankfully, this commissioner didn't want me to be blindsided, so he came and he spoke with me and said, these are the kinds of things you need to prepare in advance. So all of my friend building in the past actually paid out very well for us on that. Thing to keep in mind with all of this is that a tax rate hearing is a public meeting, so of course everyone is invited by default. And you want to keep that in mind and prepare for that, but also recognize that if you can fill the room with supporters, you're going to have a much better evening or day, depending on the time of your meeting. Something not included on the slide, but a good person to invite is your library's attorney. Our attorney was there. He did not speak, but he was present in case he needed to speak. Invite your regional librarian or the state librarian if Terry or whomever the state librarian at the time is available. Make sure all of your board of trustees are there. Let them know this is the most important meeting that they're going to go to for the year, because it really is. And I threw in children, if appropriate. Now, I did not invite my children to this, but I actually did recently, this 2 years ago, I took my then 7-year-old child to the meeting in which we had to present our tax rates. This was the year that we took the 4% increase. And again, I was a bit nervous. The magistrates all knew we were doing it, but they had been hearing stuff from all of their constituents. And what I did was I showed up early with my 7-year-old and introduced her to the magistrates as they came in. And lo and behold, they all took her under their arm. They had her sit with them. And the tenor of every conversation in the room regarding the library was very calm and gentle, because who can be mean to a young girl's father? So that may be a horrible thing to do, but but it certainly worked in my favor and in the library's favor, and it did relax me quite a bit. So moving on, the room setup is really, really important. My recommendation is that you get to the fiscal court room early. And, I'm a big fan of setting tone and expectations. If you act in an aggressive manner when people come there, others are going to respond and attack you. If you act out of fear, others are going to consume you. If you act as if you're self-assured and out of kindness, others are generally going to be kind back. And for those who aren't kind back, just lather, rinse, and repeat. You're not going to change them, but they will be in the minority. When you get there, ask, or beforehand, before even going, ask if you can reconfigure the room, if necessary, to create a feeling of equality. The way that our room was set up was there's kind of the area where the people who come to watch the meeting can sit, and then there's almost like a fence between them and the fiscal court people who sit way back from that, and some of them sit elevated. And what I did was basically move all of the tables where the fiscal court members sit, where the magistrates sit, out of the way, and pushed our chairs way up to that fence. We couldn't get in front of it just because of the way all of the benches are, but way up to the fence. And by fence, it's knee high, but it's definitely a division. And what I wanted to do was destroy any notion of division and let everybody know that we were on the same level that they were. And again, I think it really made a good impact doing that. I see Jan said you weren't supposed to ask people to sign, so you took that away quickly, right? Sign-in sheets are very complicated. I've seen lots of places do them. Our fiscal court has done it, as well as our city commission. I would avoid it. It's not worth it. So anyway, when people ask if you can reconfigure the room, and if you get the go-ahead to do so, configure it in such a way that it brings you on the same level with everybody else. It might be a bit nerve-wracking to do so, but try and view it as a calming thing, because you are just like they are, and they're just there to get information from you. The biggest thing that you want to do is welcome everyone who comes, even those who may have been antagonistic towards you in the past. Be friendly and courteous to them. We had I'll tell the story. We had a city commissioner who had been extremely antagonistic to me, to the point that he was leaving email messages to me at midnight for several nights in a row, spewing venom, and it was not related to this. It was related to something else. And I made the effort when he came. I went and I shook his hand and I smiled and I made him talk to me. I don't know that it really created much goodwill between us, but it did set a tone with him that, I certainly wasn't going to go where he was, and that I was, really trying to be as friendly and open as I possibly could. When the meeting starts, fast forward here. When the meeting starts, you might feel like the slab of indefinable meat that lion's chewing on in the picture, because it's pretty scary. And, there were a lot of people in the room who came from the city, and I really didn't know what their intent was. The mayor was there, of course, and he had come loaded for bear, and I knew that he was going to. But there were a lot of other people from the city as well, and it turns out that that many of them came because they were curious, but really none of them spoke but the mayor, and then one of the ex-commissioners spoke. But you may feel really beat up even before the meeting starts. So again, take a deep breath and just remember to relax. And the thing I'll say is, if you have been welcoming everyone as they come in, you are going to be fine. Look to the smiling faces for confirmation. One of the tricks I learned when I started doing presentations years and years ago, and I was terrified, being an introvert, it just freaked me out. Again, I would get there early and I would welcome people as they came in. And if you have a little chat with people as they come in, you've kind of made a pseudo-friend at that point. And at that point, they're much more relaxed with you. So when they're sitting down and you look to them, they're going to smile at you and they're going to nod 9 times out of 10, or even 99 times out of 100. So just if you're worried, look to the smiling faces because they will get you through. Do keep in mind that it's an open meeting. Follow your policy and the law. Remember that the law will trump your policy every single time. If your policy is contrary to law, change it. If you aren't sure, have it reviewed by your attorney. Terry always yells at us about that, and I think it's probably good to keep in mind that we make sure that our policies are in accordance with law. When people get in and you start your presentation, thank everybody for coming. You're there to provide information. Some of the people may be angry, but again, you're just there to provide information. You don't really have to say much of anything. I opted to talk a fair amount at my meeting, and that's kind of what I'm going to tell you about. But you don't really have to do anything other than listen. I thanked everybody, and I meant it. And if you can be genuine, that's a really good thing. Also thank the fiscal court for the use of their space. The law says you have to hold the meeting there, so I mean it's not like they can tell you that you can't use the space. But I have always felt that being respectful and mannerly pays off every single time. It also demonstrates that you're a person of integrity, and it's also going to help forge better bonds with your magistrate and the county judge. And also at the end, you want to make sure that you thank everyone for their input. Don't feel like you have to answer every question that is posed to you. We got a lot of questions from the mayor. I did answer some of them. At one point, I think I had been talking a little bit too much, and one of my board members at the time, who has been a great mentor and is a practicing attorney, very gently put her hand on mine, and I knew to shut up at that point. It wasn't something that needed any additional detail. So you don't have to answer every question that's posed. You are there to listen. If you can provide information, do so. If it's information that you need to provide at a later date and you feel like you ought to, then certainly let them know you'll get that information to them. If you do plan to answer questions, do your research, have accurate and defensible data available. Don't just start talking. Only talk about things that you've practiced and rehearsed. And it's best only to have one person speak on behalf of the library. I would recommend that it be the library director. Your board president may feel differently. Your attorney may feel differently. I would argue that the director is the one who knows the library and knows what's going on. And with the guidance of your attorney and board president with you to put a gentle hand on yours when you've said too much or are getting ready to let you do the talking. As the meeting starts, again, one of the important things to do is to review the agenda, describe to people how the meeting is going to progress. And all of this seems really rudimentary, but it's easy to forget these details when you're hyperventilating and nervous. The other thing is to be specific about how much time each speaker is going to be allotted. And it's really important that when you do that, that you have an official timekeeper and who very demonstrably keeps the time. What you don't want is any accusations that somebody got more time than another individual. I don't think it's likely that that would happen, but it's possible. So have somebody who does keep the time. Do remind everybody that you're holding the meeting in accordance with Kentucky law. I tried to remind people that several times. I wanted them to be aware that we knew what the law was and that we were very openly and transparently adhering to that law. And you certainly want to make sure that they know that. So we had our meeting, and I have to say it really, really wasn't that bad of a thing. It started out with me being extremely nervous, but once I started talking and thanking people for being there, it really wasn't that difficult. Our mayor was contentious. He was not argumentative, but he was somewhat accusatory. But no, I mean, he tried to be as gentle as he felt he could, but he wanted to let us know what he thought the effects of our 4% tax increase were going to be on the community. It became very obvious when our bevy of supporters that I had invited started speaking on our behalf that the room was filled with people who really would like to see the library succeed. One of my very special supporters is the principal at our local Catholic high school or Catholic school, and she came, and when she spoke, she was eloquent. There was not a sound in the room when she finished for several seconds, and she really made a huge impact. Prior board members came and spoke. We had blue bloods, so to speak, who came and spoke in our favor. We had people who said that we should be raising the tax more than we were raising it, which was really kind of helpful. The real treasure for me, though, was at the very end, and again, this gets into building the relationships, which I've been here 15 years, and I know a lot of you probably have as well. Spent a lot of time in your libraries, but I've worked very hard at building these relationships. But the last person who spoke was our county judge, and he was just amazing. He's a retired IBM executive. He's of the opposite party that I am. We have very different beliefs. He's been one of the most ardent library supporters that we've ever had. And again, when he spoke, the room grew silent, and it really took the wind out of any negativity that could have been there. When the meeting ended and I walked out, our newspaper person who had come, who has been very watchful of our tax rate over the years and was itching to write a negative article about us, came up to me and smiled and shook my hand and said, "You guys really have a lot of support." And the article that he wrote the next day was about as fair an article as anybody could have written. And I don't know that everybody would get that treatment from their local newspaper, but I did, and I was very, very pleased, certainly, by that. I'll let you read through that slide just for a second. I think I addressed most of the things that were on there. What I'll say, though, is I can't promise that anyone's going to have the same results or experiences that I had. However, with careful planning and a respectful attitude, I really believe that you might just end up like Odysseus. And I had to work Odysseus into this because Odyssey was in the title. Odysseus was not revered for his bravery or his strength, but rather for his cleverness. And if you are clever in putting together a tax hearing that not that I was clever, I was lucky, but I think all of you are probably clever. If you're clever enough to put together a tax rate hearing that works in your favor, you may just find that you'll be elevated in the estimation of your peers and community members, and the IDOS may sing your praises well into the future. There's a little cheese for you. Keep in mind, again, in the end, everything is going to be okay. It doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, and it doesn't mean you're going to sleep well every night for the rest of your life. But if you have diligently followed the law and your policies and have in good faith sought to raise taxes for the benefit of the community, others are going to see that. Not everybody, but enough people will. As always, I think you need to look to your supporters, not your detractors, for a definition of who you are and an assessment of the noble job that you do every single day. Far too many times we look to those who are willing to put us down, and we take their words with a serious ear, and I think it's really counterproductive. Your communities are full of people who love your library and will support everything that you do as long as it makes sense. So just keep that in mind. And as I told Charlie, I thought this was going to go really, really short. I don't know that there's really a whole lot to say. I don't think that there's any kind of a recipe to throw at this because I think every community is different. But for me, I think in the end, it really is the relationships that you build and maintain. It's perhaps the most important part of your job, and it's what's going to make your meeting or your hearing the most successful it can be. I saw that belief of mine play out in real time during the tax rate hearing, and I also saw it during our construction project, but that's another story for another time perhaps. And with that, our Odyssey at this point ends unless there are any questions for me. I'd like to hear about that, Jan. That's awesome. Yeah, I think they felt included too, Jan. I think that that's really a really important thing for people. When you include them in your operations, it does open their eyes to what you're doing, but it also makes them just feel like they're part of something, and a lot of them are really clamoring for that. And you're right, Debbie. Relationships with local officials is vital. I have the really unfortunate decision to make this time. Our county judge is up for re-election, and he is awesome. We also have a magistrate who's running against him, who is really awesome. So I've got an extremely difficult decision to make on the personal voter level, and I wish all communities had that difficulty of having some good people running for their local elected positions. So for those of you who said you were nervous, what makes you the most nervous about this process? Is it just the unknown of having the room full of people who might hate you? Bad publicity is a possibility. And unfortunately, there's really not a whole lot that you can do about that. I do think if you can fill the room with supporters who speak very positively about things, it's going to be more difficult for your local media to misrepresent what actually happened. And Jennifer, yeah, kickback from the community, it's going to happen some. When we built our library here a couple of years ago, there were many who really were offended that we were marring and defacing the downtown by putting a modern structure next to the beautiful Carnegie that's been here for over 100 years. And we got some bad publicity over that and some negative feedback. And I have to say that since that time, since we've opened, almost to a person, everyone who was negative has come to me and said that we did the right thing. So you think of it in terms of the longer game on this, and you'll get some kickback initially maybe, but I do think that if you know you're doing the right thing and you do it in the right way, people will see that, and the majority of them will come back and embrace you after the fact, especially if you let them have one of the starring roles in a play that you're putting on, like Jan did. Yeah, the fiscal court members, I don't know what to say, Kim. That's a difficult one. We've been fortunate in that the majority of our members are very pro-library. We have some who don't say much of anything, and I would suspect that either they or their constituents may not be so supportive. But again, it's hard for them to say much when there's a room full of people who are speaking positively about you. I'm glad your county attorney has supported you, Debbie. That's a good thing. Yeah, the whole taxation thing is something that's going to continue, and ultimately, my response is I don't make the laws. We just have to follow the laws, and the law states that the library board sets the rate, and the county just acknowledges it. Wow, Kim, have you found that helps packing when you present your rate? Good, good. Yeah, I find when you've got friendly faces around, it's hard for those who would say negative things. It's hard for them to hold any sway. Yeah, I've told board members in the past they had to go to, and if I tell them they have to, they will. But lately, I've taken to not telling them because we've had such a supportive court. I probably ought to get back into that habit, though. One thing that's really worked well for us since we opened this building, um, and I think it did help us with our tax rate hearing a little bit too, is the added community space that we put in. We have a lot of meetings here that either fiscal court members are on boards of or participate in those groups. So many of our fiscal court and our city commissioners actually come to the library for meetings, and they've seen that they can have meetings 24/7 here at the library, and they have been very appreciative of that. So, finding something that works for them and that shows them the value of what you're doing is a hard thing, but hopefully all of you can succeed in that. Thankfully, we're not going for the 4% again this year. I don't think I would want to do it. It would stress me out again if we had to, but the one thing I did recognize coming out of this was just how many people in this community and powerful people in this community were willing to come and very vocally support us. And that really meant a lot to me. And it showed that though the library may feel powerless at times, we as an organization have a lot more power in our community than we think we do. Any other questions? Wow. When I first came here, we took the 4% every single year, and as a brand new director, I was young and naive. I said, the first budget I presented to the board, I said, let's not take the 4% this year. And my board chair informed me that that would represent money that we could never get back, and that our responsibility was to take the 4% every year. And that was kind of in an era when people were more likely to do that. But he was adamant throughout the whole 8 years of his tenure. He was adamant we always took the 4%. And the year after he rotated off the board, we took less than the compensating. And he let me know how very disappointed he was. and I shouldn't laugh because he meant it. And he was another one of the two super mentors that I've had in board members. But I think we did the right thing. Since that time, we've only taken the 4% once, though. Yeah, I hope it was somewhat useful. I thought about this, and I really thought, what I could do that would be instructive. And I don't really know that there's anything instructive to say. There is no pill that's going to work for every library. So I thought I would just tell my story, and we would hope that something resonated with everybody in that.
Mark, this is Charlie. Thank you so much. I'm just going to go ahead and move us through our final slides. Y'all go ahead and keep typing in any comments or anything that you'd like to say here at the end. We want to extend our thanks to the Institute of Museum and Library Services, of course, IMLS, for their sponsorship of this webinar and a lot of the services that we provide here at KDLA. Please don't forget to follow us on social media. And I'm going to go ahead and change the screen just a little bit. And if you're interested in downloading the full-size slides of Mark's presentation today, you can do that in the downloads pod in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And I'm also going to open a survey. about this webinar right now. It should open up on your computer. And it's just a quick 5-question survey. It should just take a couple minutes, and we'd really appreciate your responses on those. And Mark, I know you said, not a lot of instructive information you could give today, but I think probably everybody in here could contribute something to this discussion that they've learned. And so we really appreciate you sharing your experience and the things that you've learned and that you can, give to everybody else to kind of help them through the process. So thank you so much for taking your time to put these slides together and helping us out with this.
It's my pleasure.
And I'd like to thank all of you for attending today. If you have any final questions, go ahead and chat those in. Otherwise, we are all finished. And thank you all for attending. Enjoy your afternoon. And like I said, I will send out the certificate of attendance hopefully this afternoon. And don't forget that this was recorded, so you can come back and review this webinar or share it with anyone that you'd like to share it with. So thanks again. And Mark, thank you again, and you have a great afternoon.
You too.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And you can just click the X in the top right-hand corner of the screen when you're ready to exit.